Hello, welcome to the Internet Seriously. I'm Lucien Taylor in Oxford.
I'm Emily Taylor in Oxford.
And I'm Kieren McCarthy in London.
This week on the Internet Seriously, we've got three exciting topics, and the background this week is obviously the England football match. I'm sorry, I don't really care about anyone else. It's been an exciting, warm time, and we're all in the middle of heart-stopping anticipation of England winning the Euro 24. But before that, we're going to talk about three serious internet things. Emily's going to be talking about the new round of GTLDs, general top-level domains, and I'll leave it for her to go into that in detail. Kieren's got some information about a new weapon in South Korea, a kind of drone with also a sort of pay-per-attack business model, which sounds really interesting. And me, it's all about travel and holidays. Wow, I like the new ending of that music there, Charlie. Thank you very much. So, Emily, over to you. The new round of GTLDs. What's interesting to you about that? Why are you talking about that this week?
Well, ICANN has been talking about opening up competition in the generic top-level domain market really for 25 years since it was first incorporated.
So just on our attack of the acronyms, we're trying to open this up for others. I think it's important to explain every time what ICANN is. It's that huge organisation that collects money to run the governance part of the internet, and nobody's ever heard of them. So it'd be quite nice to unpack that, and also TLDs, GTLDs.
Yeah, so domain names have two broad types. There's the first type is easier to grasp. It's sort of associated with a country or territory, so .uk for the United Kingdom, .de for Germany, and so on. Those in the jargon are called country code top-level domains. So the top-level domain bit means it's a domain ending. And then the other type are so-called generic names, generic top-level domains, or GTLDs. The most well-known of those and the biggest market share is for .com, but there's also .net and .org. And since about 10 years ago, there's roughly about 1,000 others, like .pizza, .wtf and lots of others. So part of what ICANN, which is the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, one of those acronyms that when you spell it out, you're no wiser. It's a not-for-profit organisation that's in charge of setting policy for those generic top-level domains that don't really have an anchor in a particular jurisdiction. And it also has some technical functions like running the domain name root database. So part of its overall mission was to increase competition. And the whole industry, no matter what else is going on in tech and in internet governance, the domain name industry is starting to really ramp up preparations for a new round to create new top-level domains.
So just help me here. We're moving from how many domains before the first round of new GTLDs? So you said 10 years ago we had about 1,000 new top-level domains. So, .xyz, etc., were added onto a pool of existing ones, pre-existing ones. How many roughly can you remember?
So previously there's always been about, between 160 and 200 country codes, the ones that are associated with a geography. And originally it was .com, .net and .org and a couple of others like
right.
.edu and so on.
A handful.
There was a handful of newish ones that were introduced about 25 years ago. So the sort of steady state in 2012, when the first sort of initial round opened, there was about 20 what are now called legacy generic top-level domains. So and then it went to over 1,000. So if you think about like big picture stuff, and I've just been reading a great article by Carolina Aguerre in a special issue of the Journal of Cyber Policy, where she really unpacks the competition and diversity and the long tail in the registry and registrar markets. You know, when ICANN was sort of setting off in its mission, it's like all about trying to reduce the dominance of .com in the market. So was the first round of GTLDs a success in 2012? Well, she says in 2012, .com accounted for just under 80% of generic top-level domains. So it was really dominant in the GTLD space. 10 years later, in 2022, .com accounted for just under 80% of GTLDs. So maybe 1 or 2 percentile difference. And the shape of the long tail, if you look at it really, really, really closely, is slightly different. So the first 5 top-level domains in 2012 accounted for 99% of the market. By 10 years later, that was 27 top-level domains. So that, you know, there is a little bit, but it really hasn't dislodged the dominance of .com. And looking at registrar markets, she really does a great job of piecing together what those of us in the domain world knew but couldn't account for, which is huge amount of merger and acquisition activity. She's traced 24 major mergers and acquisitions by GoDaddy, but also...
Oh, sorry, who's GoDaddy?
GoDaddy is what's called a registrar, so they're really the retailers who provide not just domain name registrations, but usually value-add services like hosting, web design sometimes. And GoDaddy is by far the largest registrar in the market. According to Carolina's paper, I think GoDaddy represented 63.5 million domains, or 19% of the global domain name market. And she's talking about not just this sort of merger and acquisition type of activity, but because of this huge long tail, you know, for everybody else in the market, how do you make a living? And she talks about not just vertical integration, so registries are registrars increasingly now, but also virtual integration, where registrars will be offering cloud provision, which is also, you know, tends to be provided by third parties. And then you're getting into the realm of big tech, very concentrated markets. And
without Kieren, I'm interested in your thoughts. You worked at ICANN. You've also worked as an international journalist for many, many years, looking at these sorts of things. ICANN had this big idea. I'm sure it wasn't to make ICANN some money. It was actually to improve the health of the market, to deconcentrate the market, setting aside the fact that it seems to have not really shifted the balance of market share away from .com. And you could argue that, you know, everybody registering a domain in something that's weird, like a .xyz, would also try and bag their .com at the same time while they're grabbing that sort of market. I don't want to get into a sort of technical, very, very detailed, ground down discussion about this, but did it work?
No, but the biggest gap is the fact that that ICANN still doesn't have an economist. I mean, when I worked at ICANN, I was arguing that it needs to get an economist to look at this market because it effectively sets the rules for this massive multi-billion-dollar market. And it still doesn't have anyone in there that looks at it from the economic perspective. So there's a lot of policy creators, but they don't look at it in terms of what it really is, which is quite a sort of active market. So no, it didn't work because no one was really looking at it through the lens of how do we actually increase competition within the market. They looked at it in terms of, they just assumed if we put out 1,000 more endings, then automatically it will happen. And the truth is it hasn't happened. All of those 1,000 new GTLDs still only make up 10% of the market. And .com is totally dominant.
And my question to you is, would the industry agree with you, and would ICANN agree with you?
The industry has found a way to make money from doing this, and that's also why there's been a lot of aggregations, because they found out that it's economies of scale is where the money is. If they can put together, you know, if they can spin up another instance of another registry, then suddenly they can make money out of these much lower levels of domains. So that's what's happening. That's why there's been all this sort of big accumulation and combination.
And
of
before we
companies.
go on,
And would ICANN agree? I don't think ICANN's ever really looked at this properly. I mean, they just don't. They need to hire a team of economists and look at the fact that they have a massive market and look at it from the market perspective. But they just look at it from a policy perspective.
And before we come back to ICANN, and I want to ask Emily about that, the industry has to include the consumer or the business consumer who's purchasing domain names. I am seeing a lot of new GTLDs popping up because I think for the brand owners, the .com market has been pretty grabbed and saturated, and they are seeing new opportunities to advertise their businesses with different endings.
It's very slowly getting there. I mean, the big hope was, and I ran conferences on this hoping this would happen, was that you'd have someone like Apple that would suddenly put out everything .apple, or you'd have Google or do .google, or you'd have a big brand, Adidas or Nike or whoever, or FedEx, or a URL with .fedex every single time. But they just haven't done it. I think that they've just not really seen the value in it yet, or they've not seen it as particularly helping them because the domain name system is incredibly efficient and run by machines. So they haven't really seen the value in it. Whether it will come, I don't know. It'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see.
Watching the football. Sorry, Emily, I'm going to come back to you on that ICANN point. But watching the football, I spotted what I thought was the first one to jump, which was booking. What is it?
Booking.yeah.
Booking.yeah. And I thought, they're going for it. They're going for the new GTLD. There is no .yeah. It doesn't resolve. There isn't one. So they've kind of appropriate.
There's a huge billboard and
but that's just their brand, Booking.yeah. But there isn't a .yeah. They're just using Booking.yeah, which opens up a whole new. If I was talking to the booking team, I'd be saying, what are you doing? What that opens up in terms of scams and things like that.
Well, that's really interesting that they've put out a GTLD that doesn't exist.
Yes,
I mean, that's kind of what you want to see, isn't it?
Maybe it's a blockchain top-level domain.
Might be.
Anyway, I might be wrong, because I was just looking it up this morning. I thought, actually, I've got a good example of this for our chat later. But no, Emily, back to ICANN. So Kieran's saying, well, ICANN can't possibly know about this because they're not really looking at the right thing at all. What are ICANN up to, and why are they doing a second round?
I think, ICANN is driven by its community, and the registries and registrars, the sort of the commercial interests in the domain name sector are very much in the driver's seat there. But I was wanting to come back on Kieran's point about economies of scale, so anybody really who's been in this environment for the last 10 years would say, there's been two really interesting phenomenon that there are the multi top-level domain registries, which started with an organisation called called Donuts, which has been multiply acquired, and also the spread of back-end registry and registrar software. And all of this is really beautifully set out in Carolina Aguerre's paper. I can't recommend it highly enough, and we'll put the link in the blurb with the podcast this week. But I agree with you, Kieren. I think ICANN really needs some economists, and also I think the whole thing with introducing new GTLDs after the advent of blockchain domains will make things like name collisions, which is a whole other conversation, a much more complicated and interesting topic.
Yeah, right. Thank you very much. And while we're on the topic of competition, you had a quick point that you caught your interest, Kieren, about Microsoft this week.
Well, yes. So Microsoft there was a bunch of European cloud providers put a sort of a formal complaint into the European Commission back in 2012 about the fact that Microsoft was being anti-competitive, and basically it was using its licensing to make it much, much more expensive to use its software on other people's cloud platforms. If you got it over Azure, then that's one thing. If you try to use it on Google or Amazon's cloud platforms, and they're basically the big two remaining in the market, it was up to 5 times more expensive, which is obviously wildly anti-competitive. So that was going through to the EC, but then this week, I think, Microsoft basically reached a confidential agreement, some lump sum of money, which no one's talking about, and then agreed to make some changes to its licensing. And so it's all just disappeared. And Google is not very happy about it. They say they've said that Microsoft's just paying off complaints, and said that this one shouldn't fool anyone. And Amazon is pretty angry about it as well. And I think it's just striking because this is the tech industry way of doing things, and now it's moved to cloud. I mean, they've always seized markets, anti-competitive behavior. The regulators are 5 years behind.
Right.
They charge them about a tenth of what they've made in fines, and then things move on again. And we never seem to learn how to get ahead of the curve. But I just think it's interesting now we've got anti-competitive behavior in the cloud market.
Yes,
Kieren,
and
do you think that the behaviour will change? Because in a way, if a case settles and then, better practices emerge as a result of the settlement, in a way, does it matter? Do you think it's just like pay it off and carry on?
It's pay it off and carry on. I mean, I've been a tech journalist for how many years now? 20 years. I've seen this dozens of times. And now it's just the model. That's the model. Do whatever you need to do. Grab as much of the market, squeeze as much money as possible out of everybody in whatever way you like, wait for people to catch up and then pay them off, and then do it again next week. And so that's just become the way the tech industry works. And I think it's a bit of a shame because there's a massive dip each time and then the regulators have to pull the technology back again. And then, of course, then they innovate again and take off again. But I do think it's frustrating. This is what maybe the 10th time I've seen this behavior in all kinds of markets, and it's rinse and repeat all over again.
This thing about cloud services, obviously we are sort of at a very low level dependent upon cloud services. We used to drive down to Reading, some server warehouse at 4:00 in the morning with a spanner trying to fix servers that would get overheated or bust. It was a nightmare. Cloud services is fantastic. We want to write software. We want to develop services. We don't want to fix horrible little broken machines in angry little racks of stuff that are screaming at everybody. We want somebody to specialize in that, and that's brilliant. But cloud services is becoming now a bigger expense for us. We thought there would be this concentration of data in places and it would become like a utility bill. But because it's now there's so much power in these areas, it's becoming bigger than our office costs to rent. So these cloud services are not the snappy little thing and the ease of access to data, which brings me back to my interest in Keir Starmer's proposal for data to be more local, for data warehousing. And so I think all of this is clearly, there's these anti-competitive things. There's clearly a grab, isn't there, for dominance in these areas, and this is clearly a strategic area. But anyway, enough on that because we need to move on. Kieren, you had a little one that attracted your attention. I'm still trying to understand why this has anything to do with the internet.
To be fair,
you read about it on the internet.
I read about this on the internet.
There you go. It fits.
It's the loosest of loose connections. It's fun.
We have a broad remit. It doesn't matter.
South Korea has got this new laser weapon, which is installed on its side of the DMZ, and it's basically shooting down North Korean drones as they send them over. And they fire laser bolts for about 10, 20 seconds and disrupt the electronics. And it costs, what I loved about it was the details in it. It costs 2,000 won per shot, which is basically a quid. So they fire a laser weapon at drones coming over from North Korea, and it costs them a quid each time.
I'm sorry.
I just thought,
can anyone do it? Can you sort of like crowdfund this sort of party? It could be like a kind of yeah.
Yeah. Well, could I hire it for any drones above my house?
Well, I imagine I think it's from this stage, it's sort of military technology.
Oh, I see.
It's their equivalent of
enough.
DARPA has done it.
Right.
But I mean, if it works, I imagine there'll be dozens in Ukraine in no time.
Okay.
I mean, because it's a warfare thing. But I'm sure it'll filter its way down, and then we'll have our own little anti-drone devices that we stick in our house to shoot at the neighbour's drone.
But I love this sort of pay on
Something
demand
happened to
model.
our drone, didn't it? Because Igor was doing some beautiful overhead stuff
for the internet seriously. Yes, we were
for us, and suddenly the drone got
destroyed. But
destroyed. Maybe it was one of those things.
We think our camera engineer Igor Weilemann actually flew the drone into a tower, and he hasn't totally admitted it to us. But before I move on to my topic, Kieren, what is your tech room 101?
Oh, yeah. It's the Twitter engagement algorithm, which I hate with a passion. So, I was recently a candidate in the recent election. So, of course, I started tweeting a lot about political stuff, as you do. And then since then, my lovely feed of information of people that I admire and like and are insightful and intelligent has just turned into an absolute pigsty. And so I'm actually actively trying to figure out how to get my Twitter feed back, because it's just full of angry people shouting at one another again. I say, oh God, this is Twitter's at it again. And they whatever you tweet about or whatever you look at, and I'm not even following these people, they will just find whatever is the worst stuff going on in Twitter and throw it on your feed.
But doesn't that
I've
go
lost
back,
my lovely feed.
Doesn't that go back to the sort of Facebook rewarding anger, rewarding negative behaviour, and then there was a whole sort of thing about, no, we're actually trying to be positive, but there is more engagement around negative sentiment and angry sentiment, and so you're going to get generating more revenue for their advertisers in the background. Isn't it just more of that, Emily? You did?
Well, yeah,
papers
we did some papers, back in the sort of 2017, 2018, when everyone was just like, oh my goodness, these social media platforms can be abused for electoral interference and vote suppression and so on. And it did seem at that stage that the algorithms were rewarding angriness, and those are the sort of things that would go most viral. But it really, the changes in Twitter in the last few years since Elon Musk took over, I'm surprised in a way that you can still find your community, or you could before this, Kieren, because I'm finding like Twitter, the organic reach has reduced so much for my little nerdy internet kind of policy.
I'm sorry, how many followers do you have on Twitter?
I don't know. I think I've got about 5,000 followers.
5,000? I've got about 50. Kieren, how many followers do you have on Twitter?
Kieren, I have loads.
I've got two accounts. One I've got about 3,000, I've got about 5,000, 6,000.
Oh, yeah, goodness me, you see you two.
Kieran's a public figure. So do you think that that your nice people will come back, or are you going to have to shift platforms? I'm finding LinkedIn really, really soothing.
I'm trying to hack, Twitter's algorithm to get the people that I was listening to.
Can I just suggest a modification to your Twitter algorithm as an engineer? Because people talk about the algorithm as though it's sort of the fathers of the internet. It's not. It's a few crappy lines of software that says, this guy, if he clicks on this or people engage, he then likes this. I'd like to add the BBC's algorithm into the room, because once when I first used my app, I looked at some sports stuff. Now, I'm talking about England football match because, I'm an armchair football supporter and I'll support the great...
we're all in the dugout. Yeah, we're all in the dugout advising Gareth Southgate quite a lot.
I'm not really a sports buff, but that's what the algorithm has said I'm into. So I think this whole thing of sort of marketing algorithms in general needs a serious Room 101 look at. So I can support you, Kieren, if you broaden it. But if you want to focus on Twitter, be my guest.
I also feel like the algorithms are set by... Well, it's very difficult to say this without making very big and bad generalisations, but... Sometimes there seems to be this assumption that if you like something once, it's a bit like you with sport, then all you want to see is that many, many times. And it just sort of misses a whole level of humanity, which is like, sometimes I'm interested in this and sometimes I'm interested in something else.
That you may be interesting.
Sometimes I want something completely different to just, just sort of like get me out of my grooves, and there doesn't seem to be any of that nuance or human understanding in the way things are done.
If a social media, the next iteration would be a social media site to allow the user in a very simple way to decide the kind of information that they see.
Well,
and
maybe
I could already think of ways of doing it. But if you allowed me to choose what I want in a simple way, not complicated, not having to like or dislike or move things around, but simply just sort of say, this is the kind of information I want, then I would much prefer it, because right now I've just got lots of angry people shouting, and I hate it.
Well,
and it wasn't that before. So Twitter's done it to me.
well,
saying
hot
that
on the heels.
TikTok's algorithm is really, really good, really addictive, really keeps you on there scrolling like a moron for hours and hours and hours. So that's like, job done, really.
Well, there's a tip perhaps for the new social media platform hot on the heels of Twitter, and that's Mastodon. Okay, moving on. Moving on to what I want to talk about. It's all about travel and holidays. We've been talking to our PR company who are great fun. We just like having dinners with them, really, and talking about stuff, talking about politics and things. But one thing we're trying to focus on in our efforts to sort of highlight DNS abuse of domain names, and basically scams on the internet, is to focus on one sector at a time. And I was talking with Guy Bellamy from our PR company Elephant, and they were saying we need to think about what's in people's minds at any period of time. And one thing was travel and holidays. And I've been persuaded by him not to think about travel and holidays at the booking time, which is sort of after Christmas when people are booking up their travel and holidays, but when they feel good. And this whole thing about feeling good is really about attracting the attention of consumers when they're most feeling it. You're getting to the end of July, schools are breaking up, you're going on holiday, and so we've been talking to the press about that, and they're very interested in these areas, looking at one sector at a time. First of all, I had a quiz for you because we've identified 16 sectors, Kieren and Emily, that consumers basically capture what consumers think about. So when we think about sectors, we often think about sectors in terms of tax and financing. What do you think the top 3 most abused sectors are out of the 16 that we've identified? I'll give you a couple that are not in the top 3. Charities and health and well-being are a sector each. What's your top 3, the most abused and the most scammed sectors, where the brands in those sectors are the most abused and used for internet scams attracting victims?
I would say delivery systems. I get so many spam texts and emails from people saying, "Oh, your package has arrived from," that's a clear scam, but I get so many of them. And then financial services or something along banks, something along those lines.
Yeah,
that would be
I was going to go for home delivery as well. And I think there's also quite seasonal stuff, isn't there? So around January, when people
consistent.
are paying their tax.
The top 3
what about,
are consistent.
Like the tax authorities and stuff like that? Or
Was
that included in your charities thing?
That's public sector.
Public sector.
Well, you've missed a huge one. It's our industry. The tech industry is by far the number one.
Oops.
Is around Google, around Facebook, where people are attracted to assets through those brands.
Is that like what? So the domain industry would sort of call that as, I can't remember the words they use, but it's sort of like there's stuff that's like maliciously registered, and then there's other stuff that's compromised. Would the tech industry be more compromised things where people are registering, something in an S3 bucket or something on a Google something, a Google domain or a Facebook page or something like that? Is that more like
We've yet to do detailed research into the difference, but when you look at the examples of the compromises that we're finding, it's mixed between the two. Certainly those brands are being rented in other parts that are like in links in general rather than just domain names. So it's very hard for the brands to fight back and deal with that. But looking at if we go down, we're focusing this month on travel and holidays, and I was thinking, British Airways holidays and things like that. Is that where we need to be looking? But actually, it's around those sudden decisions and those little things that support a holiday. So one thing we were looking at is Airbnb itself is a very abused brand online. Their brand is used a lot.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The other one, interestingly, is Booking.com. So an example of
You mean booking.yeah?
Well, and that's the whole other thing that I wanted to talk about, because they've basically doubled their brand attack threat landscape overnight with a cool brand idea that isn't even protected by a TLD. So people could put bookingyeah.com into all sorts of threat strings, and that will be even harder for them to fight back. But because they won't be able to sort of appeal to a registrar or a registry running that TLD. They're sort of on their own. Getting a bit technical there, but an example of a threatening URL where they've been sort of putting it in messages trying to attract victims was find-booking.com. So this is where I think this is all a dangerous area for the consumer. What's attracting the consumer? The consumer's new to this because it's sort of once a year. They don't do it much. And they are also sort of anticipating strange emails and strange text messages to service these things. And so it's like you made your booking, and you've probably made that legitimately through booking.com or Booking Yeah. But you're also expecting other, and so, if you want a basket of flowers in your hotel, pay another $50 at find-booking.com.
And it's an interesting area. Of course, it's so natural because you're outside your regular environment. You might be working in a different currency, a different language. You're also kind of on holiday wanting to splash out a bit. So all of those things make you more vulnerable to being exploited by scams, don't they?
Yeah, and so it's what I was thinking about. I mean, I'm looking here. The fifth in line in the last 365 days is Club Med, which is actually a company itself. But the others are all kind of services. Like Uber is a scam brand that is used online. Avis, the big company, you're going to get loads of little text messages about
your car
fuel
hire.
in your car hire. So these are areas for scam and abuse. So lots of stories around that. It's a very interesting area, and that's what we'll be focusing on for the rest of this month. So I think we've got to the end of this podcast. We're at 32 minutes, which is around our target of about a half an hour, unless there's an enormous issue.
I just wanted to ask Kieren one thing, like, how's it been not running an election campaign for the last week? You certainly look a little bit more human than when we last saw you a week ago.
I feel saner. I definitely feel saner. I've been getting lots of rest, although I have to say I did wake up for 3-4 days after the election was over, still convinced I was in the election with ideas about what I need to do and what doors I need to go and knock on. So the brain took quite some time to unwind from it, even though there'd been the big election night.
Wow.
So it's an odd thing.
Wow.
But I feel much more normal having had a week,
and congratulations to you. I mean, I'm very hopeful about Keir Starmer. Just mainly, I'm not, as I said last week, I'm not anti any other party really. But the consistency of government, just to literally have some people in government for some period of time, I think would be a very helpful thing. But really, congratulations to the Lib Dems, because there is a Rizzler paper in it, in my mind, between some of these parties, and I think the Liberal Democrats did very well. You do look like you have been booted out of your office. There are cardboard boxes behind you. I don't think that's anything to do with your campaign.
No, it's the land. I'm currently renting. We're trying to buy a house, and literally the day before the election was called, we got an email from the landlord saying they wanted us out in 2 months. So it's been a pretty interesting time. So we're out at the end of the month and trying to buy a house in the meantime. So from one stress pot to another.
Yeah.
Well,
keeps
great.
life interesting.
Yeah. Anyway,
maybe a bit too interesting.
Finally, Emily, Kieren, who's going to win on Saturday or Sunday? I can't remember when it is.
England.
I have to say, England. Spain are an incredible team.
They're an incredible team.
Who knows? I mean,
they are.
We've
Spain
pulled it off
incredible.
In the 90th minute, how many times now? So,
I don't know
Spain 2-1 up.
I don't know if I can take it. I've
got to finish on Emily, just reminding of us of the letter from the King of England to Gareth Southgate.
Oh, it's just so... It was so lovely. He was just saying, if you could possibly avoid, for the nation's collective blood pressure and heart rate, could you please avoid a last-minute wonder goal or a penalty shootout this time? And it was just such a human touch from the monarch, which we've never really heard before.
I know, she was a bit serious, wasn't she? I love her, but she was a bit serious. Anyway, thank you. That was The Internet Seriously from me, Lucien Taylor.
Me, Emily Taylor.
And me, Kieren McCarthy.